Hello everybody, this will be a video that's giving you feedback on the pretty much great job you did on the first 4 posts. I've got some notes here. So sometimes I'm able to put in some individual responses. Other times as I go through I take notes because I will basically read everybody's and then at different times jump in, see some of the discussion that's going on. Right, and then of course Hillary is also reading all of them, and you'll actually get typically more comments from Hillary than me, and I'll be doing the overview part. So when it comes to good reading, I think one of the biggest things that came up was just how you already know the necessity both to slow down and how valuable prep time is. So it isn't even just grab a book, sit down and read it. It can be everything from, do you have a good environment where you can read? Right? And that's something to think about, and that changes, right? I mean, if you've got kids, their sleeping patterns change. So when you have a good time to read might be changing, right? I know a lot of parents who end up getting up half the time an hour before everybody else in the house just so they can have that quiet time to get things done, right? In addition to time, think about the materials, because if you don't have pencil, paper, notepad, something, highlighter, when you read, you're just not going to be able to make those notes. And I liked it. I can't remember who, but it said annotate, 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 right? Which is always a great idea for an academic reader, because you don't want to read the same book twice. And if you don't have some detailed notes or point out where things are happening, if you don't have to read it twice, you will at least scan it twice, right? To find out where was that piece. Whereas if you have some basic notes for each story, some things that stuck out, especially if you get questions, things to look for, right? And you make notes on that, then when it becomes time to either write about it or do a discussion, you can go back, check your notes, or even in the article, scan down the sides and say, oh, yep, that's where this thing happened. And so it will make your life easier. So think about that when you sit down. Have you prepped, yourself, the location, your materials, and so you can read effectively, right? A couple other people noticed how important interest is, and one of the things sometimes that gets lost is when you've got kids or when they're young, it's like, who cares what they're reading as long as they're reading, right? So the key is to find things of interest, and if you're interested in pirates, get them every dang pirate book that you can, right? Now, in college, that interest thing is a double-edged sword. The longer you're in college, the more specified, more specific your classes will become into your interests, right? And as that narrows, you'll get closer and closer to reading things that you're definitely interested about. Along the way, there will be plenty of things that you have to read that you will not consider interesting. And if you are set up to only read when you are interested, then it's going to get hard. Of course, it's easier to read when you're interested. Yet, as an academic, it's going to be your job to come up with ideas to how to get through something when you're not interested, but the material, the content is necessary. One of the first recommendations I would make is you turn the reading into a hunt. Right? If you know you're in a history class and your history class is looking for these 4 things, make a list, right? A blank sheet of paper with those 4 things on it, and then start reading and look, or, go to any sort of textbook reading, right? Go to the back, see what the questions are before you start, right? That little review section. So then at least you're looking for something, because a lot of times you might be bored, but your brain does like the hunt. So if you know going into it, you're like, I don't care, figuring out a way to care, maybe giving yourself something to look for, right? Make it a little competitive, or at least there's a goal to it besides getting to the last page. That can help. Now, a neat thing about academia, and including this class, your interests, somebody's written about it. and somebody's put it in a journal. Here's an example I got. Uh, I like pirates, not Pirates of the Caribbean, Johnny Depp, I don't care. But I read a book called Empire of Blue Water, which was about pirates in the Caribbean and just amazing, crazy stuff. I mean, very democratic. They had, if you lose an eye, you get this much money. If you use a leg, you use this much money. When their ship wasn't in battle, everybody got together and said, hey, what are we going to do? And then somebody was picked to be the captain. And once the battle started, you listened to the captain. That was it. So, I mean, this is really, really interesting, democratic, forward thinking in a lot of ways. And, a lot of terrible stuff because they're pirates too. But it was really big, really great book. Opened my eyes to things. So when I go to the database, and this is at EBSCOhost, we'll talk more about this soon, right? Just looking in pirates, here it is in a journal. This is actually looking at what happened to the family members of pirates, right? Which is really interesting. And so it goes with lots of details about what life was like back then. So if you're a widow, it's like if you're a widow under 35, get married. And if you're older than 35, you're in trouble. And all kinds of interesting things come up when you're reading this. And I like this one too. They even set up uh, sorry about that. If you heard it. Look at this. Pardons for accused pirates became more common in the 18th century thanks to the act of effectual suppression of piracy. So basically, right, piracy is so bad, we want to do things about it. They're actually giving all lower ranking pirates an out. You know what I mean? Hey, if you quit, sell out your bosses, you're pardoned. So just, interesting stuff. I'm interested in pirates amongst a bunch of other things. And lo and behold, there's a lot of scholarly articles about this. And whatever your interest is, most likely there is somebody somewhere who did something interesting with it. All right. So next post, right? The good research. Almost everybody in some way mentioned open-minded, which is, of course, as you're doing research, you need to be open to new information that comes in. What I would add to that is open-minded with criteria, right? Because you don't want to be so open-minded that you believe every crazy thing that's out there from, somebody who says your soul's in a mayonnaise jar and blah, 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 right? So open-minded doesn't mean naive, right? Or open-minded should include, right, what field am I in and what are the standards from that field? So for example, if you are in the humanities, taking, say, an English class, you're going to use modern language association. And when you do your documentation, you're always going to give us the author and the page number, right? Because to us, Shakespeare always speaks, or some silly thing like that, right? But art is constantly speaking to us now, and it spoke a long time ago in a different way, but it's still speaking, it's present. Now, if you're going to become a psychologist, right? No. If you're a psychologist, one of the things that they're going to want to know is, when did you get your source? So it's not just author and page number, but it's year. Because I want to know if you're giving me information from 1950, because maybe there's been 30 studies since then that show that that main idea was, no good. The other thing, and I think this is actually really interesting and a little bit of a plus to me in that APA mentality, right? The American Psychological Association. They're not big on quotes. If you're bringing somebody else's information in, they want you to be able to paraphrase it so you understand it, which I think is pretty cool. Humanity's more open to quotes, but a lot of times that's because if you're talking about an author or a writing sample, you're actually going to quote exactly what it was. It would be weird to paraphrase somebody's poem, right? It makes more sense that you are going to make a quote of it, right? The other thing about research that I'd like to add, and I think more than one person mentioned this, but in addition to being detailed oriented, right? When you go find something, you want to save a copy, you want to make notes so you can find it again. But there's a practicality of research. If you know you have 3 days to get something done, you've got one level of information you can find. And basically, it's information that you have instant access to. We'll talk about how you can make sure that's the case. If you know you've got a month, then you can all of a sudden start request stuff from places. So I'll also show you that, where you might find something very good and your paper's due in 3 days. You don't have time to wait. Oh, your paper's due in 4 weeks. I'm going to do my research early, find those things that aren't available and request them. And a lot of times, if it's a book, they'll actually send the book to the Century College Library. If it's an article, you'll end up getting a PDF of it, usually pretty quick. At least that's what I found, right? So very good job on the good research and the good reading post. Both of them require time and patience. And so one of the things that goes along with being a good researcher and a good reader is time management, right? To make sure that you have enough time to read something slow enough so you can get the details to then at a later date, right? Talk about it, share your opinion about it, use it to form opinions, right? So that was those two. That doesn't sound right. Those two. Nice job. Right. Chapter 12. Right. Again, well, I'll just say this. Really nice job on all the posts. There's a couple of you who are skipping these. Don't, right? Make sure that, let me know if you're having any sort of technical problems, right? But you want to make sure the discussion is very important, just to, this is where I have you test out ideas. This is where you get practice taking an idea from a text, saying what you think about it, which is very similar to what you're going to be doing with your papers. So the discussion place is a great place to practice, right? Sharing your ideas, reading other people's, being exposed to, different ideas. So if you've been missing them, you want to make sure that you change your schedule up so you'll have time to do those, right? Oh, here's what I wanted to say. Now, the book, chapter 12, makes a very good point about how we need these different views, right? And I think pretty much everybody commented about that, and I like the way that it was written in a sense that you could understand these ideologies and what's important to them. The other thing that I want to add too is that we all need worldviews, and we all have them, right? I mean, if you think the world is a bunch of crap, right, and everything's corrupt, you will act in one way, right? And some of us think that, and we act that way, right? If you think that, you can go to the flip side. You might be super naive and think everything is great and you can trust everybody, and then you'll make decisions that way, right? And both of those people, everything's corrupt or everything's great, you can probably in your head already see each one of them is going to lead into troubled waters. Now, while we don't want to be, I think as an academic, right, while we don't want to be locked into one ideology, I think it's important for all of us to understand that even if I don't fit liberal, conservative, libertarian, right, that doesn't mean I don't have one. There's something that is guiding me, and we need it, because otherwise how would we judge if something is positive, if something is negative, right? Well, on the one hand, we have sort of that things that have been just absorbed from the culture that we grew up in, right? So certain things make us go, oh, other things were like, hey, and sometimes that can be different depending at the culture you're in. Our worldviews help us navigate the world, right? So yay worldviews, right? As a scholar, we want to make sure that our worldview doesn't limit us from a broader understanding of whatever the topic is. Oh, right. The last thing I want to say on the chapter 12 is people noted, and this totally makes sense, that a lot of us, right, when we're 16, heck, 14, 16, 18, 20, come to the realization that, most of the things I believe are what my parents believe. Now, some people would use that idea to say, therefore, so what? You're just following your parents. That does have no value, or some sort of thing about you're just being a robot. Well, that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it as your family was successful enough to exist and have you and raise you, and their values are what they use to do that. So if you're in college, right, which you are if you're watching this, your parents or parent, right, or guardian or somebody helped you get here, right? And their values led to you being here. And of course, some of you might even be here because, um, more on the flip side of that, right? Some of us were saying, hey, no, you can't do that. And we're very contrarian, and so we did. But the overall idea is solid, right? Your folks didn't pick, even if they picked their beliefs from their parents and their parents picked them from their beliefs, well, that just lets you know those beliefs have worked for generations, right? And now you get to decide which ones of those beliefs that you absorbed as a child still work for you and which ones are you going to broaden out. Right? Now, for the last post, and this moves us into Borowski's This Way for the Gas, ladies and gentlemen. Right? A lot of people picked out page 39, right, of the horrors of the train. And yeah, I think horror and horrific are definitely appropriate words for this. And I think one of the things to consider while you're reading this is basically there has been psychological research, and that's all of us in a sense, right? If you put somebody in authority telling somebody else to do something, right, 7 times out of 10, that person is going to go ahead and follow authority, right? And then you throw in the actual, and now this is just there's a test they did with just saying, hey, shock a person, and right, 70% of the people went past the danger level just because the guy's in a coat, right, who looks like oh, it's okay, do it. So imagine if 70% of us would shock a person past dangerous levels just because somebody in a lab coat said it, what would we be willing to do with a gun at our head, right? One of the things that has been mentioned about his writing, and a lot of people have said, is just the matter of fact way he writes adds just a depth to the oh my godness, right? Because for us in our living in Minnesota or somewhere nearby in these times, it's like, what would that even be like? But if you think about, for the millions of people who went through this, and that was Tuesday, and Wednesday was the same. So he writes in that sense that was just life, and it shows you how incredibly resilient and adaptable we are, that can become normal. Now, of course, this is also an author who killed himself 5 years later. So the trauma of what he experienced and saw clearly cost him his life, just not in the moment, right? And later on. Right? The other thing that I wanted to just bring up is that anger at the actual victims. And the one thing I think, if anybody, if you've ever had a friend who was sick, you're helping them, and you've at some point just got fed up with them coughing, right, or asking for stuff, you get it at the super, super small level, right, about how, oh my goodness, I've been helping you, I'm exhausted, and all of a sudden this person who you've been helping all this time and it's just as sick as they were before, all of a sudden you can start getting angry. So you can imagine, maybe you can, that there they are, trapped, do this or die. You can get angry at the people above you, but there's nothing you can do about it. I don't think it's a huge surprise that that anger gets transferred to the victims, right? And there's sort of like almost a blaming of, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here unloading you kind of thing. So there is just a ton of things going on at all kinds of levels. And over the next, couple weeks, we'll be looking at it. We'll be looking at these stories through a couple different lenses, and which means we change the lens, we change what we see, and by moving around using different lenses, hopefully at the end of this, you will have, a better understanding of just what we are capable of, including the worst of us and the best of us, and keep up with the discussions. And that's the place to put out these ideas and see what's going on. And you'll notice too, some of us are like, never even heard about this before. Now it's the first time I'm reading it. Some of us, right, there's one family connection, other ways to connect to these stories. And so all of that is just going to, increase the different ways that we look at these things. I am very happy with your discussions. You're doing a great job. You're going into detail. So when I say a great job, right, what do I mean? You're answering the multiple questions being asked. You're going into specific detail about the things that you're talking about. And then when you're responding to each other, you're not just saying, hey, nice post. You might say, hey, nice post, but then you follow it up with, and my connection is this, or I liked when you said that, and here's an extra detail about it. So keep that up. That is a great, right, exchange of ideas. It's also, right, organizing your thoughts at the paragraph level, which is going to just, you may notice, I hope you do, that by the end, you will be much more comfortable giving paragraph answers, right, even verbally, right, not just on paper, to questions, because you will be used to, answering these typically open-ended questions with, here's my thoughts, here's the details to back it up. So keep up the good work, and I'll talk to you later.